Alright, this screencast is going to start with a quick map recap. Since in class today we discussed the difference between where the Pilgrims and where the Puritans settled in Massachusetts, we haven't actually gotten to the specific location of the Puritans yet, but I mentioned the Pilgrims settled in the Plymouth colony. So if you see this map, you can actually see the borderline of Massachusetts, and you see the southeastern portion that's hooking around Cape Cod. That is specifically the Plymouth colony, so that is where the Pilgrims will be settling, and then north of that is Massachusetts Bay, and we'll get to the Puritan settlement in just a second here. In class, we were analyzing the quote by John Winthrop, leader of the Puritans, "We must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill." This quote is Winthrop basically suggesting that he believes the Puritans were chosen by God to create a holy community, and to also be an example to others in the colonies, to the English back at home. They're really putting themselves on that pedestal and kind of holding themselves in high regard as a good example for other groups. So he does expect obedience and proper behavior in that, though, and we'll talk about how the Puritans governed themselves today. So the Puritans did come over in much larger numbers than the Pilgrims, and they will establish a settlement in Massachusetts at the Massachusetts Bay colony. So the Puritans settled Massachusetts Bay. And they are going to create a representative government that has a governor and an assembly that was elected by the colony's white freedmen, kind of similarly to the Pilgrims. You had to be a male, but you also had to be a church member to vote in Puritan government. They will establish a theocracy. So it's not going to be, just because it's a representative government, it is not a complete democracy. It is very theocratic. A theocracy is a government that has a state-supported religion. So in this case, Puritanism is the state-supported religion. Other religions are not tolerated, and also laws could be based, on this specific religion. So the laws of the government are going to be reflective of Puritan values and Puritan beliefs. So we do not have a separation of church and state like we do with the Pilgrims. It's a big difference between those two groups overall. And like I said, even you can't even vote if you don't go to church. So that's kind of enforcing religious rule as well. Everything the Puritans did was for God. They worked very hard because they felt it would please God. That's kind of where their work ethic comes from. They established schools like Harvard, with the primary goal of producing more religious ministers. You had to pay your taxes to the church. The whole town is centered around religion. And that's, again, reflective of theocracy. Not that the Pilgrims were not religious people, but they don't make it that, overall requirement in their politics like the Puritans do. It's more of a government-expected thing. And a government-enforced thing, I should say. So if anyone challenges the church's leadership, church's ideas, they're in trouble. And so we're going to go through a couple of examples here of when Puritans living in Massachusetts Bay found themselves in trouble, just for different reasons, and had pretty interesting outcomes. So Roger Williams is one example. Roger Williams was a settler living in Massachusetts Bay, but he taught against the idea of theocracy. He did not support the idea of theocracy, and he also defended Native American rights. And that is going to rub the church's leadership the wrong way, so he will eventually be banished from the colony, and he and his followers eventually establish a settlement in Rhode Island. So he is going to be kind of the founder, if you will, or one of the founders of the Rhode Island colony. And when he kind of, makes his mark here, he's going to assure that there's a separation of church and state, as he would have liked to have seen done in Massachusetts Bay. So Roger Williams flees, is exiled, and establishes Rhode Island. A female example of a dissenter is going to be Anne Hutchinson. She was very outspoken, which, one, they don't like anyone to speak out against the church, but the fact that she's a woman is a double whammy. They really disapprove of her being a woman and taking on a leadership role of any kind. But they essentially, the leadership of the church in Massachusetts Bay is going to call her a heretic because some of the things she was talking about, for example, were that God made revelations to individuals and not just ministers. She's kind of trying to downplay the importance of the church's leadership. So she will also be exiled from Massachusetts Bay. And I do believe she eventually goes to settle in Rhode Island, where Williams is set. Other Puritans would leave, not anyone specific, but just other Puritans did leave Massachusetts Bay in search of better land, in search of better opportunity, trying to get away from some of these strict judges and church leaders. Some Massachusetts Bay settlers would relocate and establish a settlement in Connecticut, just south, where it was very similar to Massachusetts Bay, honestly, in terms of the type of government they had, but it was less strict overall. For example, voters didn't have to be church members, but there was still a union of church and state. You still had the laws reflecting the religion in Connecticut. But that's just, another group. So that's just kind of showing you how all those little New England settlements are established by these different religious people who just have different kind of motives or get kicked out for whatever reason. It's probably why Rhode Island's so small, for example. It wasn't, it didn't serve a huge purpose in the beginning. It was a group of exiles, fleeing there. It's very populated today, actually, compared to some of the other states. But it's still very geographically small. So, witchcraft is something, and really just witchcraft hysteria, I should say, is something that does begin to happen throughout the colonies. And I would say that the most notable and well-known incident of witchcraft hysteria was definitely in Salem, Massachusetts, which is, again, part of that Massachusetts Bay. Well, Massachusetts Bay is part of Massachusetts, I guess, but this Salem's within the Massachusetts Bay colony. So Salem was a Puritan settlement, not a Pilgrim one. And honestly, this event is going to happen much later into Puritan settlement than it's not within the first couple of years. It's several decades in. So there's a few other factors that we haven't really gotten into yet in terms of the timing of the Salem witch trials. I think the New England region is kind of on edge for different reasons. But I just want to focus on the story as how it happened within, Puritan New England and what exactly happened here. So essentially, a few girls in particular, start having these medical symptoms, seizure-like episodes, pains that doctors are just unable to explain. No one knows what's causing these symptoms. And let's be honest, knowing modern medicine today, it could have been anything, but we just won't know, at this point in history. But a few of the girls will basically say that it was witchcraft, and there was a slave, Tituba, in the colony, and people basically accused her of being a slave, but they also accused some other neighbors of basically being witches and performing witchcraft on them, because that's just obviously the most logical explanation if you can't explain any sort of medical cause to something. But basically, people just get really scared. The idea that there are witches living amongst Salem is very terrifying to Puritan settlers. And this whole, these small few accusations are going to turn into mass hysteria, mob mentality. People are fearful of being accused themselves of being a witch, so they start pointing the finger at other neighbors, accusing them of being a witch. The church takes these accusations very seriously. There are trials held, and it gets very out of hand that by the end of this, nearly 200 people were jailed and 20 people were hanged. When we know that there was no practices of witchcraft really happening, this is really just things getting out of hand. But that just kind of shows you the extent to which the church will take things seriously, and how things got, I guess, or how things could get so out of hand in the Puritan settlement, like why they would take it so seriously overall. All right, just a few other factors about colonial New England before we move on to a few other colonies. So the demography, just breakdown within New England. These family units that are coming over do typically yield more stability than the Chesapeake, because they're coming over with the intentions of settling long term. So, even though there was some health issues early on, as a whole, they are making settlement a priority, and the fact that they have a good sex ratio, a balanced sex ratio, means that they will populate more easily. They are very, very, they have a very actually high rate of natural population, like actually higher than back in England, in the Puritan New England region. In terms of the economy, they don't have the same type of agriculture opportunities that the southern colonies have, so they make money through shipping, through shipbuilding, fishing. They are a very successful people despite having some disadvantages, like there's no gold, it's not the best climate overall, there's poor soil for agriculture. But what does make them successful again is they have very strong family and community organization, and they have a strong, Protestant work ethic. They are very hardworking. They are focused on saving, and they have strong communal interests, which means they have the betterment of the colony in their mind. So and each other. So they want to work hard together to survive as a thriving settlement. In terms of democracy, they did have in the New England region town hall meetings where most white men actually do participate. Keyword white men, you could not be a woman voting or participating in government still at this point. But it is impressive that most men were participating, or most white men were participating, because this means most of them are owning land. And that is kind of unique to the British colonies, like as the Chesapeake, because in the Chesapeake, most men are not owning land. Most men are working on land, but not owning it. But this is also unique to England, because back at home in England, people are not used to, working the land, owning land, owning their own property. And I have a few more things I wanted to say, but this screencast has to pause for a second because I'm only allowed to record up to a certain amount of time. So I'm going to record a second shorter one. I promise it's going to be way shorter, just to kind of finish out what I needed to. So write down any questions you have from this one and then follow the next screencast.